Good morning, everybody. This is an addendum to the podcast I did on Jupiter stationing retrograde at 21 degrees of Gemini. Sorry. Now then, I've got a lot of friends everywhere, and I've been, obviously devastated by Helene, and I was quite astounded by some of the astrology, especially with the geodetic map and a couple of other things that were happening around that when the hurricane hit and the path of it. So I thought I'd start looking at the projected landfall paths of the new one that's building that they're now predicting will be a category 3 and hit the um, west coast of Florida big time, kind of around Tampa, but maybe a little bit lower. Things have been shifting and will shift. So I might do updates to this. But I do want to say, I really think, please, if you live anywhere in those zones, please heed the warnings. This is a very unusual one, and some of the astrology, I think, is pointing to the fact that whilst it perhaps won't be as widespread as as Helene was and kind of go up through the country, it's probably going to cross right over Florida. And it could be huge. So I'm going to dive into the astrology, and I've added a couple of things that you will see, and I'll talk about them. So this morning, I was like, kind of like, oh, I wonder if there is an asteroid named Milton, and indeed there is, and it's at the predicted landfall right now. I've put this for Tampa is 2 p.m. on Wednesday, I think. It could be the day earlier, though. I'm not sure. So, different forecasters are kind of saying. So I will update this. But either way, look at this. Oh, in fact, that makes it even worse. So, okay, so follow when the predicted landfall is for this hurricane. And why does it make it worse? I will look at, in fact, I'm just going to look at one thing for um, um, to see if there's a map with the predicted landfall time. At the moment, it's one of those things that could rapidly change, apparently. So, don't let's leave it at this. It's Tuesday. Well, what's happening on Tuesday is that the moon is in Sagittarius. Jupiter will station retrograde later that day. And this is asteroid Milton. Okay, I had to put it on as a fixed point because it's not in my um roadmap. Now, not only that, though, this is like Jupiter is the guide for the Sagittarius moon. So we've got that big push of this big opposition, as well as a big station. Retrograde Jupiter, is turning direction in an air sign, which is very much about wind, and a lot of the problem with hurricanes is not just the rainfall, but also the wind. And then not only that, this is all aspecting Mercury over here, Juno over here. And this is really kind of, pushing that even further. And it's all aspecting Chiron. So we have what's called a mystic rectangle going on here with Jupiter stationing retrograde. And in fact, let me just get you to the actual point of Jupiter stationing retrograde. So you can see that it's kind of pushing as Jupiter stations retrograde just 12 hours after that 2 p.m. 2 p.m. time that I posted. But not only that, it's also in a T-square to Earth Vesta, which is the state, the horse, in the sign of Virgo. And that's a tense aspect as well. And Virgo is an earth sign, and it may kind of hopefully wake people up, but please stay safe wherever you are. But there's more, and I did kind of mention it a little bit in my weekly report, but I want to draw some lines. So we've also got this watery grand trine here, which is to Nessus, which the revealer of abuses of power. And you could kind of say that, maybe it's highlighting how we've abused how we work with how we live on the earth. We've got Mars kind of booting, giving a great big push in the moon's sign after the moon opposed stationing Jupiter. And then we've got Venus in the other water sign, and Venus, is related to the physical earth matters and things. So here's the water as well. So we've got the wind and the water and this asteroid, Milton, kind of all pushing towards that. And I'm going to say this is all aspecting Saturn as well, which is kind of, like push, build, push. Mars is a big push. Venus is kind of really digging in deep. And this is some heavy, heavy water. Now, I thought I'd see if there was any other kind of things that might kind of really give some indications. I do want to mention that the nodes are still at the same point that they were at during the eclipses. So we're still under that energy. The nodes, I use the true calculation because that's the osculating. They sit at the same point through the eclipses, and it kind of makes that point really potent. So the eclipses are still at the eclipse point. We're still under the energy of these that powerful new moon eclipse that brought Helene, basically. But also look at this. Uranus retrograde is now only 10 minutes from conjunction with Algol again. So this is very kind of shocking, very kind of potent energy. All of this is so, so potent. But I want to mention one other thing that's building, and I did talk about it again in my weekly forecast for you personally, but I'm going to point it out here as well. There's also a finger of fate and a finger of, or a finger of God, a yod from Chiron that's involved in that Jupiter station to Venus, with Chiron and Jupiter in this aspect, pointing at Jupiter, pointing at that water. So that's, Mars guided Aries kind of saying, and then Jupiter in air sign Gemini, wind, air, but also what we're going to learn from this, really pushing at that Venus, and Venus was the guide for the eclipse, is the ruler of all this Libra energy that we still have, that's also connected to all of this, and as also the ruler of Taurus, which is an earth sign, and very kind of this is kind of the, really kind of this could really kind of shock and surprise us. So, there's other things I noticed too, just to give you even more complications. Saturn retrograde and is coming back to aspect Ceres still out of bounds in Capricorn, about our infrastructure and the structures of our lives. Saturn is the modern, or is the guide for Capricorn. This is kind of pushing as well. These two are moving towards each other. Pluto is also well within the zone of stationing retrograde too. So Pluto is at his station point. So that's a big churn as well. We do have the Grace spinner, Chariclo, at the midpoint of these two, which kind of helps me think that we might kind of find the grace to really start to pay attention here to deal with things. So all this to say, oh, I did want to look at one other thing. Hang on a second. Let me get that up. And this is the geodetic map for. All right, so just bear with me while I get this one up. I had to kind of um, I'll clear the drawings. Let me stop the share and get into this one deeply. So this is the geodetic map, I think. All right, I've got it up. So I want to share with you. Now, bear in mind, I've not really, I have taken classes in this, but I've started to really pay attention to all of this. So what's happening during about the time of landfall? And of course, again, um, I will be updating this as the models shift. So what line is going right through this area is Maki Maki, and that's kind of, one of those Maki Maki was very involved and is still at the point of that last eclipse on there was at 10 Libra. Maki Maki is at 10 Libra. Maki Maki is the Hawaiian bird god um, of the Easter Islanders. And you can go and read about that story if you like, but it's definitely kind of like creation kind of energy, but creation is often really messy. And so you can see that that line goes through there. And so that's pretty powerful. These dwarf planets are really showing up a lot. Also, very close to that line is Pholus, kind of takes the lid off it. Mm, um, that's kind of a bit challenging as well. But over to, we tend to look at the lines over to this far side to see what's building. We've got the moon and Neptune building in the Gulf. Water, they're both, really connected with moon, with watery energy, building, pushing in the Gulf. The North Node is here, which again is still at the point where it was on the eclipse, and this is asteroid chaos. So this is kind of tough, I think. Again, I'm not an expert on the geodetic maps, but I do want, if I can help at all, to kind of um, make people in Florida pay attention to this one, because the path currently is supposed to go right across. And there's some indications that, the winds might sustain. And I think that Jupiter's station in an air sign in aspect to all that Libra energy air with the moon opposing and with Milton opposing and with Chiron involved as well, could make this, very, very powerful right across that path of the middle of Florida. So, there's nothing definite at the moment. The one of the interesting things is that I put asteroid chaos in because the situation is very chaotic at the moment, and things are very random, and it's very chaotic, even of the point that hurricanes that form where this one formed and forming how they do have been very rare throughout history. So the storm watchers are even finding it, a little bit difficult to predict. But even somebody I know who is very who I follow, I don't know him personally, who lives in Florida, and he calls it his down to earth, weather or whatever. He is not a scaremonger generally, but he has even he is saying, this could be bad. In fact, let me I don't think it'll be as widespread as Helene. So there's that. And and well prepared. Florida is generally more prepared, of course, for these things. So there is that. So so I just want to share his something he posted this very morning. I'm recording this on Sunday, October the 6th. He said, I'm not one to exaggerate, and he really is not. But if he said, if the storm strengthens as predicted and were to hit St. Pete or just north, the storm surge would likely exceed Helene and be the worst storm surge in that area for the past 100 years. It's the areas in red on this map that would be in trouble. So if you live in any of these red areas, okay, please, please prepare. All right. There's St. Petersburg, just I'm sure if you're in that area, I'm sure you know these map areas. Please, please, prepare, be prepared, evacuate whatever you can, if you can. At least move inland or some higher ground or somewhere safer for at least while it's incoming. Just do what you can. All right. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But when I saw that asteroid Milton is opposing the Jupiter station retrograde and how it all aspects in the chart, I was a bit like, okay, all right. See you next time.